The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully.
That was renowned Oxford evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins describing his understanding of the God of the Bible. But wait, there's more.
Some people I know who are atheists will say they wish they could believe it. Some people I know who are former believers say they wish they could have their old faith back. They miss it. I don't understand this at all. I think it's an excellent thing that there's no reason to believe in the absurd propositions I just admittedly rather briefly rehearsed to you. The main reason for this, I think, is that it is a totalitarian belief. It is the wish to be a slave. It is the desire that there be an unalterable, unchallengeable, tyrannical authority who can convict you of thought crime while you are asleep, who can subject you, who must indeed subject you, to a total surveillance around the clock, every waking and sleeping minute of your life, I say of your life, before you're born, and, even worse, and where the real fun begins, after you're dead. A celestial North Korea. Who wants this to be true?
That was Christopher Hitchens describing his conception of God, not terribly unlike Richard Dawkins, although he adds the nice touch that God is a dictator, kind of like the dictator of North Korea. And if you're listening to that description and you're thinking, wait, that doesn't sound like the God of the Bible at all, you're right. It isn't the God of the Bible. What they're describing is a caricature, a misrepresentation, or in logical terms, a straw man. They've erected for themselves a mischaracterization and they're attempting to knock it down. Ha ha ha. You see how smart we are. The difficulty with describing God like these two men have is that this isn't what the Bible teaches at all. Either they didn't read the Bible, or when they did, maybe they were half in the bag. But when we read the Bible, we see that God is love. That's what John says twice in 1 John. For instance, in the ministry of Jesus, in Jesus' high priestly prayer, this is his very last prayer in John 17, before he's arrested by the mob and brought to the cross for us. Jesus prays, Father, you've loved me before the foundation of the world. And so what God was like before creation was made, before anything was made, God was a father who lavished his perfect divine love upon his son, and his son joyfully received that love and reciprocated it back to him. And the Spirit was the gift from the Father to the Son, the bond of love between the Father and Son. And we see this relationship spill over in the New Testament. For instance, when Jesus gets baptized, right? Jesus rises out of the River Jordan. God sends his Spirit upon his Son in the form of a dove. And God says of his Son, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. The best part of John 17 is when Jesus says, Father, that you would love them, meaning his disciples, that you would love them just as you loved me. Which means that as perfect a love that God has now brought sinners, his enemies, he's brought them into his family, forgiven them of their sin, paid for their righteousness, and he has now made them his children. That's not a divine dictator like North Korea at all. And so when you hear people like atheists and agnostics and other people who are hostile to Christianity describe love in these terms, identify the straw man, identify the fact that they're really not describing the God of the Bible. Additionally, when we talk to people who belong to other religions, other people who worship single-person gods, like the Jehovah's Witnesses or Muslims, for example, point out that their God isn't love, right? Their God wasn't Father, Son, and Holy Spirit loving each other for all of eternity. Rather, their God was one individual in heaven for all of eternity in utter solitude and loneliness. And if you think about, why would a God like that want to create? Probably to be kind of mean, maybe to make some slaves. Sounds a lot like Christopher Hitchens' description, but our God is triune and our God is love.
I've seen so many different worldviews that it's hard to imagine that one can find hope in a system that leaves them empty and damaged. Somehow they manage to unify religion surrounding the planet, but they get salty when you speak the truth with biblical standards. Like they would believe anything that came along as long as it's easy and godless. Hide the truth and unrighteousness when it's made plain and obvious, regardless of the fact that they break the very laws of logic. Then call us ignorant and intolerant when we just being honest and say it's prideful for anyone to claim that there's an absolute.